this is the first time I speak overseas. And since the war started, then basically I found myself giving readings and talks all over the place, you know. So I don't know, I had talks with survivors, with children of survivors, with social workers, with doctors in ER, with elderly people, with people who were hospitalized forcefully in mental institutes. But it's like, it always, and always when I go to those places, then when I speak to my wife Shira, and she says, what are you going to do? And I say, I try to come as a presenter of humanity. You know, like, I don't know, every company have a presenter, I don't know, Coca-Cola, Mercedes. Then I come and say, hey guys, I'm confused, I don't know what's going on, I'm a little bit scared, you know. And sometimes I have a feeling that there is something in this kind of interaction that is helpful, because most people in extreme situation, or maybe I think the entire planet is in an extreme situation. So all of us, we can't help thinking that there is something, that there is a solution to our condition, and if only the world around us wouldn't be that so stupid and evil and stubborn, this will be solved, you know. And this, it doesn't matter, it's not a regional thing, it's not the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it could be about vaccination, it could be about the Russian-Ukrainian war, it could be about, I don't know, how the elections in the US, whether legal or not legal, it doesn't matter. It's like we all kind of live in a narrative where we think that there is something really unfair and it doesn't make sense that is happening, whatever narrative we're holding. And I think that there is sometimes kind of a benefit of trying to return to your inner root and not say, oh, this is the word, it's crazy, oh, this is the word, it's depressing, oh, is this the word, can we fix it? But just say, who am I and what is my position in this word? And basically, maybe to be a little less active in an automatic way and a little bit more contemplating and thinking. And I want to say that, you know, that when the Russian-Ukrainian war started, I have a Facebook page, and I'm showing off. You don't have one, I have a Facebook page. So I have a Facebook page, and I started getting harassed by people on Facebook, borderline threatening me, that, or just being very annoyed and disappointed that I didn't change my Facebook page to the Ukrainian flag. I thought that I could support a cause in my own individual way, and I also thought that the fact that millions of people turn their Facebook pages to Ukrainian flag, I agree, I admit that I didn't see what the Ukrainians were getting from it. Like, I understood that it would be easy for me and that I would feel very active, that I would feel that I've been doing something. But I couldn't convince myself that this would have an effect. I thought, you know, packing, I don't know, clothes and sending them there made a little bit more sense, or I don't know, giving a speech or whatever. But this, I think this kind of a systematic word where there are kind of things that we're supposed to do. You know, I mean, in Israel, if you support the kidnapped people, you should buy yourself this dog tag. That means that you support those people. But I believe that there are people who support the kidnapped and they think about them a lot, even more than people who bought this tag, you know. So I really think that living in this world, that we have one tragedy after the other, and all the time some kind of a call for action. We all have to do something, and if we won't do it, everybody will be pissed, and they'll cancel us for not doing that thing. But that thing, looking back, you know, when we look, I don't know, again, Corona, the Russian-Ukrainian conflict in Israel, we had the judicial revolution, the Gaza war right now. I'm saying all those kind of things, they never seem to reach any kind of closure, right? I mean, if any of you remember that when we argued if the vaccines were good for us or bad for us, does anyone know what happened in the end? Does anyone know who won the Russian-Ukrainian conflict? I think that at some stage we kind of moved of being scared and morally guilty about something else, and then we started dealing with that. You know, one trolling game that I always have with journalists that come to interview me about the Gaza war, they're always very, very good at telling me numbers of casualties, of all the casualties, of all the people that died. And then I always tell them in the end, can you tell me how many people died this month in the Ukraine? And none of them can, even those who cover the Ukraine, because they're now doing the Gaza war. And, you know, and next season when there will be alien invasion, or I don't know what waits for us ahead, they will not be able to tell the numbers of the casualty of the people in Gaza. It's as if there is this kind of a tricky, subjective thing in which when we meet the reality around us, then it's not, if, let's say, in old time, we would be perceiving something and trying to understand it. Right now, we are so active and doing things and we are kind of creating our own reality. And this reality, now it's one thing and tomorrow it will be another thing. So I think that if we don't want to hitchhike all our life between different narratives that now call for action, then the only way I know of doing it is basically looking for something inside you, something that will be rooted in you and will go out to that world. The first text I wanted to read is basically a text. It's not I can't call it a story. It was a WhatsApp message that I sent to a girl. I've met in one of the readings that my wife and I been giving in the kibbutz in which people got massacred, and she survived, but her father died, and her best friend died, and basically heading on the car somewhere else, I wrote this text and sent it to her, and it was a text message, but then she told me that she read it in her father's funeral, so I said, okay. So I should also respect the text message. And it's called Signs of Life. Now close your eyes and try to stop being angry. Try to stop raging at all those who deserve your righteous fury. Close your eyes and allow yourself, just for a moment, to simply feel the pain, to hesitate, to be confused, to feel sorrow, remorse. You still have your whole life to spend persecuting, avenging, reckoning, but for now, just close your eyes and look inward, like a satellite hovering over a disaster zone, searching for signs of life. A lot has been taken away from you, but you're still a human being, wounded, bloodied, angry, hurting, frightened, drowning in sorrow, but still human. Take a deep breath and try to remember the feeling, because you know that a minute from now, when you open your eyes again, it will be gone. So I wanted to speak today. Again, I must say that, it's really totally associative. So, Kai, if I talk too long or sideways or something, you tell me. So I wanted to speak today really a little bit about the role of imagination and of storytelling, basically in surviving, in staying alive, And I grew up the youngest of 3 children in Ramat Gan, a child of 2 Holocaust survivors. And very early on in my life, I kind of learned that imagination and storytelling are important tools for survival. Not for maybe for your physical survival, but for your mental survival. And that they're crucial, that it's something that one has to develop. And I got it both from my mother and from my father, because my mother would tell me bedtime stories when I would be a child. She told all our children. She would make up those stories every night. And she told us in a very young age that she lost her parents in the ghetto when she was very young, that she didn't have a lot of memories from her parents, but she did remember how every night before sleep they would make up a story for her. And that this had made her feel very loved and very special, because she knew that those people passing the day trying to survive, knowing that they can't bring her food or a warmer coat, what they can do is make up a story for her. And she told me as a child that she never fell asleep while a story was being told to her, because she said it would be like a miscarriage. If I fall asleep, they would never finish the story, and they would never know what happened in the end, and the story would not exist. So it was my responsibility to listen to those stories and keep them. And when my mother had a family, this was the thing that she wanted to keep, the tradition of telling stories. In our house that was full of, our apartment, it was full of books in 7 different languages, because each of my parents spoke 6 languages. Didn't have any children books, and my mother thought that children books were an invention made to help parents that don't have any imagination or they don't like their children. Those people deserve help so they can read a classic to their children. But for her, technically, the idea of reading her child a story from a book was the equivalent of ordering a pizza instead of making their children a dinner. This is what lazy parents do. If you love your children, you tell them a story, a fresh story every day, and those stories were precious. I remember that once a child came to sleep at my place, and we were already in bed, and I said, now it's fun, and now my mom is going to come, and she's going to tell us a story, and she tells the best stories, and he was really excited. And then my mom came and said, if we need anything. And I said, no, but I told my friends that you're going to tell us a story. And then my mom looked at the friend like this, and she said, tomorrow, ask your mother to tell you a story. And she left the room as if he was unworthy of a story, because a mother can tell a story to her beloved child, but you don't tell a story to every snotty child, that just happened to visit. And I think that very early on as a child, I realized that there could be a time where everything would be taken from me. This was something that was very apparent. My parents came with nothing, no photos, no clothes, no nothing. And that the only thing I could give people when everything will be taken away from me is stories. And that this is basically the primal or maybe the last way to show people love. If you can tell a story and you don't have a food or a coat or anything, you could stand naked in the snow, you can still tell somebody a story and give them your love. So I think that this was a moment where I understood crucially. I didn't want to become a writer. I studied engineering in the beginning, and then mathematics, and I wanted to have a high-tech company and be rich. I don't know, they told me it was the best way to go. But knowing that, I always knew that I must know how to tell a story, because there will be people that I love and that I would want to give something to, and that I would want to share my love, and I would want them to know me in a different way. So storytelling existed there long before I even saw it as an art. It was just really some kind of a survival mechanism. And my father survived the war. Unlike my mom, he survived it with his parents. He lost his sister, but he was hiding in what is now Belarus. He was hiding with his parents in a hole in the ground that they dug, and they dug a very shallow hole because they thought that the Nazis are going to come only for one day to do a check and leave. But unlucky for them, and my parents' life were always had a dramatic thing. Then, whereas in the building right next to the hole that they dug, the SS had built their headquarters, and they couldn't come out of the hole. So they were in the hole, but they couldn't come out. And somebody would give them a little bit of food, and they would urinate in a bucket that he would take every few days. But basically, my father had to be in this hole that he couldn't even stand in or lying. He basically sat there with his parents for 600 days. And when the Russians they liberated this area and they took them out, none of them was able to move their muscles. They were contracted. And I asked my father when I was a child, how did he remain sane? I said to him, to be honest, like I'm saying, in our town, we didn't have many Holocaust survivors. It was a town where most people were of Iraqi descent. But the one Holocaust survivor that I really knew was totally crazy. And he was this guy, he was a janitor in a sports club, and everybody knew that he was crazy, and everybody talked about him passing the Holocaust and becoming crazy. And I asked my dad when I was really young, how come you didn't become crazy? This guy, I don't think he did half, he went through half what you did, like as if I knew, you know. And my father said, I had a trick, he said. Every day that I would wake up in this hole in the ground, he said, I would imagine a parallel universe that had everything that we had in this world, but every day I would change in this universe one detail. For example, I would live in a place in which Nazis seek Jews and Jews hide from Nazis. But in this world, when the Nazis capture the Jews, they force them to eat candies. You know, the SS, it's only chocolate. But the Wehrmacht, they have those gummy bears. And they catch me, and I live the entire day in this place. I run, and they made me eat chocolate. And then I say, I can't no more. And then as I go, this soldier catches me and makes me also eat chewing gum. And I say, oh, please. And he says, no, you must finish them. And then they made me eat cake, and it was really, really bad. But in the end, they left me alone, and I went to sleep, and I woke up the next day, and it was exactly the same. And there were Nazis, and they really wanted to kill all the red-headed girls in Europe. Only red-headed girls. And I happen to have a red-headed girl in my class. She's very pretty, and I hide her in my attic. And when the Nazis come, I trick them, and she falls in love with me. And we become a couple, and we grew up, and we have a family. And then I would go, and then the day would end. And the third day, I would make myself another word. And when I was a child, I said to my father, Dad, this is so dumb. Like, you would make yourself those words, but whenever you would imagine them, there would still be people who killed your family and who would want to kill you and your parents, and they're above your head. What's the point? And my father said, I didn't have a plan. It was just a reflex. He said, when you're in a very narrow place, you want to widen it. And when you're in a small hole, and you try to widen it, and you can't widen it physically, then you widen the world around you. And if I can imagine a different universe, then, okay, it doesn't exist, but it's an option. Who knows? Maybe tomorrow the Nazis will wake up and they discover that they have this problem with red-headed girls, It's an option. Before I imagined it, this was my entire world. The moment I can imagine, I make this space wider. And he said, when you're in a very small space, sometimes making it wider is the difference between keeping it or losing it, keeping your sanity or keeping your life or losing your life. So I think that from this was a different kind of a meeting point with this idea of imagination, but imagination as a survival tool. And some years later, I got drafted to the IDF. I joined the Israeli army. I talked a bit about my family. So one of the well-known genetic facts about my lineage is that all the men in my family from my father's side, going 4 or 5 generations back, they were all horrible soldiers. They were very bad. Like my great-grandfather was a horrible soldier in the Tsar's army. But I can tell you stories about my father or my brother. You know, my brother is maybe the funnier one, but my brother, during the Lebanon war, he was in communication, so they left him on a mountain to guard an antenna. And when his commander returned a week later, he saw that my brother, out of boredom, he built the antenna, those huge wings, and a head of an eagle. And he was put on trial for practicing paganism. Apparently, you could not try a man for practicing paganism because it's not against the rules, but they found a rule, a conduct unfitting an IDF soldier / practicing paganism. And in his trial, my brother's line of defense was that he just did it because he was bored and he does not worship the antenna, and that his commander may claim that he saw my brother bowing to the antenna, but he merely saw my brother tying his shoelaces. But for some reason, they didn't believe my brother and they believed the officer, and my brother was actually 40 days in jail for this thing. So I'm saying, and also it's like I can say about my father that my father always told me that one of the things that he was most proud of was that he was an infantry soldier who fought in 5 wars, always in the first line, and he never hurt anybody. Anybody, you know, he would say, I didn't even wound anybody. But I was always there, first to go, but he didn't do it. So I think that as a child, by the way, I really wanted to imitate this idea, saying, how can you be brave and be in the front, but still not hurt anyone? And the best answer is to become a writer. You know, that's the best way if you want to pull this one off. So when I joined the army, I saw that this gene was also very active in me too, and I was a horrible soldier. And with me, it had to do a lot with my mom's upbringing, because my mom, being an orphan, she invented all kinds of specific rules of what should be done in our home. And one of the rules that we had was the rule of explanation, which means that the children have to do what their parents ask them to, but they can always ask for an explanation why they have to do it. So if a father says to me, go to sleep, and I say, okay, but why? He says, because it's 11 p.m. and you have to get up at 7 a.m. and you need to have at least 7 hours of sleep. So this was a wonderful system back home. It didn't work as well in the army. In my first day in the army, during basic training, when they asked me to crawl in the mud, I had this dialogue with my commander, in which I said to him, could you please explain why you want me to crawl in the mud? And I said, this could be helpful for both of us, because if you want to humiliate me, I'll make sure that my hair will get dirty. And if you want me to be in better shape, I'll basically crawl faster. So let's do it as a team, you know? And of course, it only went downhill from this point. And again, my personal theory is that when you ask your commander in the army for an explanation, you're putting him in a tough spot, because most of the times they don't know what they're doing. So it's really not that much of a fair question, you know. But this, what happened was that during my compulsory service, I was kicked from, I think, 4 units in 6 months. And In the end, my best friend was able to kind of get me invited to this computer unit because I was allegedly like this computer genius, but I wasn't good enough, but my friend did my exams for me, so they'll get me to the unit, like I gave it out of the window and then he returned it to me and stuff. And I started doing those computer shifts, and it was very difficult because I had to be in a very small room, like I would say as big as the stage, maybe a little smaller than only the stage. And the shifts there would be sometimes 24 hours, 32 hours. And I didn't have to do anything at all. It was totally isolated. There were no cell phones, no internet at the time when I was a soldier. And it was like a basement, 4 floors underground. So you basically were, it's like a Vipassana kind of an experience. You know, you sit there and if nothing goes wrong, you don't do anything. And I was really okay with that. And I was there for about a year when my best friend who got me into this unit had a shift there. I was in the guarding unit. We were together, and at some stage he shot himself at this room, and I took him to a hospital, and basically after a couple of days he died. And he shot himself in this tiny room where we would do those shifts. And basically the army, being a very organized body, they sent me to have some evaluation if I'm normal after being exposed to a trauma. And the evaluation was about a guy standing saying, "You think you're okay?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Great." And he put a stamp, and he sent me and went to his lunch break. And basically when I got back to the army, to my unit, they were happy that I had a stamp that I was okay, and they sent me to do a shift. And I got into this room, and I had to be in it for more than 24 hours. And tiny room, the floor was very, very sticky. You know, basically, I think when my friend shot himself, they asked somebody to wash the floor, and this person wasn't that much into it, you know. I didn't even have an equipment to wash the floor, so basically every step I would go, I would really feel my friend's blood under my feet. And in this small room, there was a wooden cabinet behind where you'd sit, and when my friend shot himself, the bullet went from his temple and hit this cabinet. So basically the bullet was still there. And I had 24 hours to pass. And as I sat at the table, it felt really very symbolic, because there were 2 things on my table. There was a computer, you know, like this kind of PCs that you could, and a printer, and a rifle with 2 magazines. And 24 hours with yourself, you know. And at that moment I remembered my father being in a hall. And I thought, you know, what would my father do? You know, he would make up something. He would make up a word where things happen in a different way. And I said it kept him alive, you know, maybe it will keep me alive, you know. And this was the first time in my life, basically, that I wrote any text of any sort. I was kind of like a math physics major, and I thought maybe I'll read to you that first story that I wrote 37 years ago. And it's called Pipes. Pipes. When I got to 7th grade, they had a psychologist come to school and put us through a bunch of adjustment tests. He showed me 20 different flashcards, one by one, and asked me what was wrong with the pictures. Those seemed fine to me, but he insisted and showed me the first picture again. the one with the kid in it. "What's wrong with this picture?" he asked in a tired voice. I told him the picture seemed fine. He got really mad and said, "Can't you see the boy in the picture doesn't have any ears?" The truth is that when I looked at the picture again, I did see that the kid had no ears. But the picture still seemed fine to me. The psychologist classified me as suffering from severe perceptual disorders and had me transferred to a carpentry school. When I got there, it turned out I was allergic to sawdust, so they transferred me to a metalworking class. I was pretty good at it, but I didn't really enjoy it. To tell the truth, I didn't really enjoy anything in particular. When I finished school, I started working in a factory that made pipes. My boss was an engineer with a diploma from a top technical college. A brilliant guy. If you showed him a picture of a kid without ears or something like that, he'd figure it out in no time. After work, I'd stay on at the factory and make myself oil-chapped pipes, winding ones that looked like curled-up snakes, and I'd roll marbles through them. I know it sounds like a dumb thing to do, and I didn't even enjoy it. But I went on doing it anyway. One night I made a pipe that was really complicated, with lots of twists and turns in it. And when I rolled the marble in, it didn't come out at the other end. At first I thought it was just stuck in the middle. But after I tried it with about 20 more marbles, I realized they were simply disappearing. I know that everything I say sounds kind of stupid. I mean, everyone knows that marbles don't just disappear. But when I saw the marbles go in at one end of the pipe and not come out at the other end, it didn't even strike me as strange. It seemed perfectly okay, actually. That was when I decided to make myself a bigger pipe in the same shape and to crawl into it until I disappeared. When the idea came to me, I was so happy that I started laughing out loud. I think it was the first time in my entire life that I laughed. From that day on, I worked on my giant pipe. Every evening I'd work on it, and in the morning I'd hide the parts in the storeroom. It took me 20 days to finish making it. On the last night, it took me 5 hours to assemble it, and it took up about half the shop floor. When I saw it all in one piece, waiting for me, I remembered my social studies teacher, who said once that the first human being to use a club wasn't the strongest person in his tribe or the smartest. It's just that the others didn't need a club, while he did. He needed the club more than anyone to survive and to make up for being weak. I don't think there was another human being in the whole world who wanted to disappear more than I did. And that's why it was me that invented the pipe. Me. And not that brilliant engineer with his technical college degree who runs the factory. I started crawling inside the pipe with no idea about what to expect at the other end. Maybe there would be kids there without ears, sitting on mounds of marbles. Could be. I don't know exactly what happened after I passed a certain point in the pipe. All I know is that I'm here. I think I'm an angel now. I mean, I've got wings and this circle over my head, and there are hundreds more here like me. When I got here, they were sitting around playing with the marbles I'd rolled through the pipe a few weeks earlier. I always used to think that heaven is a place for people who've spent their whole lives being good. But it isn't. God is too merciful and kind to make a decision like that. Heaven is simply a place for people who were genuinely unable to be happy on earth. They told me here that people who kill themselves return to live their life all over again, because the fact that they didn't like it the first time doesn't mean they won't fit in the second time. But the ones who really don't fit in the world wind up here. They each have their own way of getting to heaven. There are pilots who got here by performing a loop at one precise point in the Bermuda Triangle. There are housewives who went through the back of their kitchen cabinets to get here, and mathematicians who found topological distortions in space and had to squeeze through them to get here. So if you're really unhappy down there, and if all kinds of people are telling you that you're suffering from severe perceptual disorders, look for your own way of getting here. And when you find it, could you please bring some cards? Because we're getting pretty tired of the marbles. So 2 years ago I came here to Berlin for a sabbatical with my family, and basically my big plan was to write a book about my mother, because I wrote a book about my father, The 7 Good Years. It's basically kind of being a son to your father and a father to your son, and my mom loved this book. And she wanted me to start writing nonfiction, but I only write fiction. And she says, come on, when will you write another nonfiction book? And the joke was, when you die. You know, it's like I wrote one about that, when you die, I write one about you. And when my mother died, I discovered that I have zillions of stories to tell about her. But I couldn't compile them to anything. It was like many contradictory sides, and it was a very strange thing, and this had turned into an exhibition in the Jewish Museum in Berlin. That it was basically about my attempt to tell my mother's stories, and I brought a couple of texts, but maybe I'll read only one of them, or we have time to read two? Yeah. Okay. Great. So the first one I want to read is basically just so you get the format, And the second one I want to tell you, but it has to do, I think, with this idea of the importance of being able to tell a story. Why is it good in times like this to know how to tell a story? But I start with the one just so you know how short and weird they are. So this one is called Razor. When I was a child, my mother hugged me all the time. All mothers hug their kids a lot, I know. But my mother hugged me more than a lot. I liked it. But over time I began to notice that when she touched me, it was always with the back of her hand, never the palm. One evening at bedtime, my mom finished telling me a story and then stroked my face with the back of her hand. Mom, I asked, how come all the other moms touch like this? I demonstrated a caress with the palm of my hand, and you're the only one who touches like this. I demonstrated again with the back of my hand. My mother smiled and kissed me on the forehead. When I was little, she said, I didn't have a home like you do, only an orphanage, and the people there, some of them didn't always want to be good to me. So to be on the safe side, I stuck a piece of gum to the palm of my hand, and I lodged the razor blade in the gum. She showed me how she stuck the gum to her hand, and then inserted an imaginary blade into that invisible gum. When she finished, she held the back of her hand to my face and caressed me gently. This, she whispered, is how I touch the people I liked. And this, she let the palm of her hand hover millimeters from my face without touching it, is how I touched the ones I didn't like so much. The palm of Mom's hand was so close to my face that I could feel its warmth. The blade didn't touch me, but I knew it was there. Palm of the hand, back of the hand. Until that evening, I never knew they were so different. So this is one of the texts. There were many of those texts. I want to read to you the one that is maybe most special for me, but I want to say something about it. Is that my mother, I was raised with parents that were Holocaust survivors in a country that the Holocaust was maybe a main theme of its creation. And I come from a town called Ramat Gan, where mostly everybody's from Iraqi descent, so they hardly had any Holocaust survivors. So whenever they would have ceremonies for the Holocaust, they would ask my mom to come. And my mom would always have this answer. She said, sir, I think you got it wrong. I went through the Holocaust. I don't work in the Holocaust. You know? And I think that one thing that my mom had was this kind of feeling that as a Holocaust survivor, you are not free to tell your own story, but you're like a pebble or a pebble or a jigsaw puzzle. You are part of this. You know, in the Olympics, they have all those people, little people, and they do flags and they do the signs of the Olympics. So as a Holocaust survivor, you should be this little stone that people looking from above will see together what the Holocaust is. But my mom didn't want to be there. She wanted to tell her story. She didn't want to work for the Holocaust, you know. And I remember an incident that when I was a kid, my mom took me to a children's doctor. And when we went to the children's doctor, it only had 2 chairs waiting in the corridor. And there was another child, I think 1 year older than me, and his mother sitting there. And when we got there, it's a small town, so the mother went with her elbow to the kid and says, "Get up, come on, get up. She's a Holocaust survivor." And the kid stood up like this next to the seat, and my mom, you know, like she was, I don't know, in her 40s, late 40s, you know. She was looking at him, and she said to him, "Why did you get up?" And he said to her, "Because you're a Holocaust survivor." And my mom said, "And what do you think it means that I'm a Holocaust survivor?" And he said that you're a very poor person who suffered a lot and was damaged, you know, something like that, you know. And my mom said, "You're a smart child. This is an interesting take, but I want to give you my take. I think that the fact that I survived the Holocaust, what it means is that if you, your mom, and me will stand here, and the seasons will change, and it will be very, very cold, and then very, very warm, and we will have no food and no water, then most likely you two will collapse before me. So I would advise that you keep your seat, you know? So I think that, you know, in moments like that, my mom had showed me the power of telling a story, you know. They wanted her to enslave herself to this story that made her basically, you know, the one that was lucky enough not to get killed from a family of, it was more than 50 people in a family, she's the only one who survived, you know. So this poor woman like sniveling, crawling, no, this wasn't the story. This was, for her, the Second World War was a period movie with her as Vivian Lee, you know, going through it and doing the best part. And the background was horrible because the thing with a period movie is they put you in a period and you have to make a movie as her. So it wasn't the nicest time, but the story was about her and about what was important for her. And I think that, you know, today when we live in an age where basically the stories are being stuck down our throat, you know, people want us to cancel other people. What do you mean canceling other people? What are there computer programs that you cancel them? But they want you to cancel people who didn't cancel a third party. You know, they want you to be this little pebble in their story, which is usually crazy. Instead of, you know, sometimes I slap people, sometimes I spit at them, sometimes I block them on Facebook, and sometimes I pee on their doorstep. Please don't manage my anger, you know. Let me do it the way that I want. Let me tell my own story. And with my mom, I really learned how powerful this tool is. And I'm going to read a text that I usually avoid from reading, but this text came out in the exhibition in a very, very strange way. Because when I did these exhibitions, there was a lot of talk about creating some kind of a gender balance, you know, being okay, you know, and of course, like, it's me about my mother, and it's me reading about my mother, it's me everything about my mother. So there was this kind of thing saying, we need more women presence, we need more women presence. And all the time I said, my mother is a woman, isn't she? I'm not saying anything about my father. But still there was this kind of dialogue, And one day when we Zoomed, we talked about a story in it about my grandfather. And then one of the staff, she said, and what about the story about your mother? And I immediately, being from the Levant and an old guy, got annoyed and I say, the entire exhibition is about my mother. I want to tell a story about my grandfather. So I didn't tell a story about my grandmother. Everything has to be balanced. And then this woman who was the designer of the exhibition, and she's super sensitive and super smart, she said, Edgar, calm down. I heard a story about your grandfather, and it was fascinating. And I thought, maybe you have a story about your grandmother. It has nothing to do with gender. And I said, yeah, well, I don't know, maybe I have a story about my grandmother. Okay, I think. And my mom, she had this thing that when she would tell me stories, they would always have some kind of a point, like a fable. So I said, I have these stories that my mother told me about how it is important never to lie to your children. And I said, I can tell you this story. And I tried to tell the story. I heard it when I was 6 or 7 years old. And it kind of, most of my mother's stories I would not repeat, especially not kind of from the war. So I never told it to anyone, but I said, I remembered it, and I was telling the story. And as I was telling the story, I was looking at the Zoom, and I saw Anna, the woman who asked me to tell the story. There were many people, but I was looking at her, and she was crying. And I said, oh, why are you crying? What's going on? And she said, it's because of your story. I said, what, my story about why parents should never lie to their children? She said, yeah. And basically, I must say that from this moment, I understood that this story, that I was in my mind always the story of how parents should never lie to their children, was actually something else, So I read it to you. It's called The First Angel You See. I only ever heard this story once. My parents had just come home from a wedding, and my mother was completely drunk. If she'd had one less drink that night, I probably wouldn't be able to share this story with you. It's a little hazy in my imagination, like a scene from an old film. In the story, my mom is little. It's during the war, and her mother, my grandmother, is holding her hand while carrying mom's baby brother. And the three of them race up the stairs in some building. Mom can hear the footsteps of the people chasing them. When they get to the rooftop, my grandmother tells Mom to run as fast as she can and jump down to the roof of the next building, which is slightly lower. Don't be scared, she says. You can do it. Mom waits, expecting her mother to say, and I'll be right behind you. But she just stands there out of breath from the run. When will I see you again? My mother asks, and her mother bends over so their faces are very close and says, you're going to run as fast as you can and then jump as far as you can. And as soon as you land, you're going to keep running and not stop until you get to Daddy. After that, you grow up into a woman and will meet a man and fall in love and start a family with him. And in the end, you grow old and die. And right after you die, go up to the first angel you see and tell him, I'm going to see my mom. And he'll know, because I talked to him before you get there. And he'll bring you to me. This is not where the story ends. After my mom jumped onto the other roof, she didn't run as fast as she could, the way her mother had instructed her. Instead, she hid and watched the Nazi soldiers kill her mother and smash her little brother's head against a brick wall. When she told me this, I could feel her guilt, but I also sensed how proud she was of her mother, who even in the last moments of her life refused to lie to her daughter. 47 years after she told me this story, my mother died. And the last words she said to me were, "I'm going to see my mom."
Thank you, Etgar. I find it really hard even to speak after that last story. And I remember when I read it in the exhibition, the effect was so powerful, and it's just as powerful right now. So let me ask you a very general question. You're such a versatile writer. You've written for the movies, you've written a graphic novel, you've directed films, but again and again you're returning to the short story, and you're known as a master of the form. And when I heard you giving this, a writer's biography, autobiography, including the text to show us the movements of your development, I got the idea that yes, of course, he's a short story writer, because your roots out of which storytelling grew are really conversational storytelling. And it's not storytelling from books, but from a person to another person. And your stories are very much like stories you tell to entertain, to console, always stories that are happy and sad. Does that make sense to you? What draws you to the short story?
Yeah, I agree with you that I think that there is something very oral for me when I think about storytelling, and it's even though I read a lot, I must say that nowadays I don't read as much as I did, but I read a lot through the years. I loved reading, but till this day, when people ask me which writer or who is the writer that influenced you the most, I say, why don't you ask who is the person that influenced me the most? Why do you think writers are only incestuous and they are affected by writing? They can be affected also by life. And I must say that, again, that I love writing, but I think that my inspiration mostly comes from people, and when you talk about the short form, I think that I started writing during my compulsory army service, and this was one of the most unhappy periods of my life. And the thing about writing was that for me, writing was a place of freedom, because when you're in the army, you can't speak your mind, or in my case, you can speak your mind and get into trouble for it. But you must kind of lose your individuality, which was something that all the time my parents kind of told me, this is the thing you must cling on. You cannot be, don't let them turn you into a Jew, don't let them turn you into a Holocaust survivor, be something that, and in the army I felt all the time that they were kvetching me, they were stepping on my head. And I think that there was something about writing that till this day when I write, it's really one of the happiest experience I have in my life. It's really, I enjoy it so much. It doesn't have, sometimes really, I have a personal assistant, and she's not my personal assistant anymore, but still every birthday, she has a copy of my hard disk, and every birthday she gives me a story that she found that I wrote and I forgot that I wrote. Because sometimes I enjoy writing so much that I don't feel that I have to do anything with it. I can write a beginning of a story or end of a story, and who cares? And this joy comes from the fact that I think that, that when you're second generation, I think that at least in my case, you're kind of guilt-driven. You don't want to hurt people. You don't want to do things that will affect them. It's like with me as a child, I think, I would say in 56 years, I would be surprised if I cried, let's say, I don't know, more than 10 times since I was a kid. You know, they would teach me when I was a child I wouldn't cry. You know, it's this idea, basically, crying is when they kill your parents, you cry. If they just wound your parents, shut up. You know, it's really like this kind of idea, kind of putting this crazy benchmark, you know. And there was something about writing that in writing I could just be myself, you know. I could cry, complain, be aggressive, do whatever I want. And not only that I didn't, like my mother didn't work in the Holocaust, I didn't work in writing. It's not that I would do something and have to return tomorrow and toil in it and I just have a beginning, but it's so frustrating. No, I write something and I kind of edit it, but the next day I can write something else, you know. So there was always this kind of feeling that when I went to experiment with long form and I wrote screenplays and plays, it was still like, it was this idea of saying, you know, this is kind of a joint effort. I'm doing a blueprint if I write a screenplay so the director can understand it, because the actors can understand it. I have to do this for all of them. It's not like writing, but writing for me is almost like dreaming. And to come to this area that is so private and precious and wonderful and say, you know what, I'm going to do something that is structured. I'm going to write chapters that I don't feel like writing, but I need them for the arc. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. It's kind of to toil in the place where you enjoy yourself the most. Then I must say that I don't have the tolerance to do it. It's really like, it's like when I get in the story, it's not that I didn't try writing a novel, you know, but after writing one chapter, the next day I had a better idea for something else I wanted to write.
Yeah, I think one of the wonderful things when I'm reading you is that, yeah, your stories are always, they can go to extremes of sadness, but they also contain hilarious episodes, and there seems to be no jarring between that. And when I think about books I've read, there aren't that many authors that come to my mind that really unify these two poles in this way. Where do you think does that come from in your case?
Well, with me, I think it also comes from my parents because, again, I grew up in the heart of a horrible, horrible story. You know, I want to say, like, you know, that my father, he lost his sister, he brought his parents to Israel. His father, after he brought them to Israel, was stabbed to death in the eve of Yom Kippur by a crazy Holocaust survivor who lived in the building. His mother was run by a bus. You know, it was really like, it's like a Monty Python movie, you know? It's really, everything is too extreme to be true. And my parents insisted on telling the story as their story. And in the story, it was funny, and it was inspiring, and it was optimistic, and the most horrible story in the world could flash the fact that my mom had an amazing mother, you know, and it's not about her having to see her mother and brother being murdered. So for me, the idea of entering story, it means you can go to the darkest corner, to the most painful place, and if you dive deep enough, you'll find a pearl. You'll find something. You'll be able to take something out of it that is beyond this kind of a wave breaker, this kind of first impression. This is horrible. This is also horrible, but also human, you know. And I think that, you know, that it's funny because my mom and my parents lived in days in Israel where you couldn't get more pigeonholed than being a Holocaust survivor. If you were a Holocaust survivor, everybody knew everything, what you've been through, what you're good at, what you're bad at, you know, what you should be excused from. And my parents rebelled against it. Today, in the age of social media, we're all Holocaust survivors. Everybody pigeonholes us. We are judged by our nationality, our religious, our gender, our whatever, you know. We're all stuck in this hole. And I think that, you know, that at least I've been trained how to wiggle myself out of it. But I'm saying we all should toil in that we will not be locked in this place where our Facebook feed wants to lock us. We will say we're doing it for another reason. Our story is another story. What we're interested in is another thing. ours. The root comes from us and goes to the word, and not us hitchhiking, through whatever our Facebook want us to take us to.
Etgar, thank you so much for this fantastic, really very impressive and unforgettable evening. Thank you very much.